Ladies and gentlemen, fellas, welcome back to the podcast and the YouTube channel. We're talking about league-winning wide receivers. We already have a video out there on our league-winning running backs. They are maybe some will cross over with our must-draft players right at their ADPs, but these are guys that, we're going to describe them as league winners because maybe they're not the greatest ADP values compared to some of those must-draft wide receivers, must-draft running back type videos, but what they are is a high upside play. Miles Sanders last year was a high upside pick, depending on where you took him, maybe the 5th round. You kind of knew as a rookie running back with another workhorse back there in Jordan Howard, this might, very similar to a couple running backs in J.K. Dobbins and Jonathan Taylor this year, this might take a month or maybe even 2 before this starts to pay off for me. So I'm going to draft him. I'm going to hold on to him. I'm not going to trade him away out of anger and sadness. My expectations are that I know that down the stretch he can win it for me. The final 6 weeks of the season, if you had Miles Sanders on your fantasy team, you were feeling really, really good. Similar things can be said for some of the rookie wide receivers, mainly A.J. Brown, if you want to talk about him over the final month of the season or so last year when he started really playing close to like 80 to 90 to 100% of the snaps one week when he faced Marshawn Lattimore and the Saints, and he put up 15 points that week. He put up a bunch of top 10 wide receiver weeks, 3 top 10 wide receiver performances for A.J. Brown during the final 4 weeks of the season last year. Those types of players, who are the guys that are going to absolutely win you a league? And I'm going to be talking about 3 of those players at the wide receiver position today. But before we get into it, if you could please hit that like button for me real quick and that big old subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. Bottom right hand corner, it takes 1 second of your time to tap it, and it really goes a long way as a creator here myself, an independent content creator, to helping this channel grow organically and reach more people. If you're listening on the podcast, $50 giveaway once a week. More people are reviewing the podcast now, so maybe you got like 1 out of 10 chance, but it's totally free. You leave a review on iTunes, the Vetri Show, and then you get a chance to win $50 every Sunday. I draw that person. Just leave a way for me to contact you, whether it's Twitter, an email address, whatever you feel comfortable with in that post. 5-star review, something nice about the show. Really appreciate that as well. And Monkey Knife Fight is the sponsor of this video. There's a ton of other videos, and they're sponsoring what you're seeing over my shoulder. This is these aren't rankings. This is just a bunch of player profiles that you can click on. There's a bunch that are going to continue to be added. These are the wide receivers, and you click on them, and it's just a little brief. We'll use some of them for today's show about the receiver, the changes in the offseason, target competition, what that receiver's skill sets are, whatever it might be, right? Their pros, their cons, their stats, all of that from last year. That is on my Supreme Draft Guide. That is just one of the pieces of the puzzle. You have key stats, you have rankings, you have a bunch of different things, tiers. I'll write the player profiles, so be sure to check it out. More premium analysis to come. And it's just $10 because of Monkey Knife Fight. So go down below right now, use the promo code SALNFL, that's SALNFL if you want to check it out on Monkey Knife Fight. $10, the Supreme Draft Guide. You get access to every single thing you're going to need to crush your fantasy football drafts for the 2020 season. If you're not eligible for the offer anymore on Monkey Knife Fight for a variety of reasons, you can go down below and just get it for the normal price on my website. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section or hit me up on Twitter at SalVetriDFS. So what do you say we get into this first fella today? And I kind of already name dropped him, and it's going to be A.J. Brown. And honestly, A.J. Brown, he was a league winner last year for people, right? The final 4 weeks of the season, if I look at it, right? He played Oakland in week 14, Houston, New Orleans, and then Houston once again. He put up 33.6 points in week 14 against Daryl Worley in Oakland, playing on almost 80% of the snaps. You want to know what he did that week? He ended up finishing as the wide receiver too. Week after that, he put up 25.4 points, went absolutely ballistic, caught 8 balls, 114 yards and a touchdown, finished as a wide receiver 7. Then he puts up like 15 points against Marshawn Lattimore, wide receiver 24. Final week of the season, wide receiver 6. Ends up catching 8 balls for 124 yards and a touchdown. The man was just an absolute beast. His snap share really started to spike the second half of the year, like a lot of rookie wide receivers do. But just from the get-go, like A.J. Brown was out there being an alpha. Like week 1 of the season, not a lot of people remember, A.J. Brown scored or had 100 yards receiving week 1 of his NFL career. His first ever game, 100 yards, 3 receptions on 4 targets, 100 yards. Then you don't want to know how they reward him. He ran 14 routes that week. They let him run 13 routes the next week. But the thing that really did stand out was he gained about 10% of the snap share from week 1 to week 2. If you want to look at it even more, he then has another huge game where he finishes as the wide receiver 6 in week 4 of the season against Desmond Trufant, not a good player last year. He ends up going for 3 receptions, 94 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So he starts to pop off. Now, what do they do after that? He only ran 12 routes that week. Well, the next week, they only let him run 15 routes. But again, look at the snap percentage. It goes from 44 snaps to 73% of the snaps. Pretty much after that week 4 game, you had A.J. Brown running 70% of the snaps or more in like every single game after that. So it took him about a month to get up to that 70% snap share. Some weeks it dropped down to maybe like the mid 60s, low 60s, but it was pretty much 70 to 100% for a couple weeks during the season after that. I think he played 100% of the snaps 3 or 4 times last year. And what that all amounted out to for A.J. Brown was, as a rookie, he played on average 72% of the snaps, which is very good based on him not playing anywhere near that the first 4 weeks of the season. 52 receptions, over 1,000 yards, and 9 touchdowns on 84 targets. He had a 19.5% overall target share. He was the number 1 receiver on this team, although it took him a month or so to get ahead of Corey Davis. He ended up getting there pretty quickly relative for most rookies. Now, he played in a hyper-efficient offense where Ryan Tannehill was leading the league in true passer rating, play action passing, so he is due to regress in terms of touchdown percentage, right? 15.4% rate, 9 touchdowns on a total of 84 targets. That's probably not going to continue. But what will happen probably is that this touchdown or the target share is going to go up for him. Maybe not the percentage, but I do think 19.5% probably climbs to maybe 24, 25% or more this year. But the overall volume of targets, 84 last year, if you just kind of take his targets over the final 12 games and put them for the first couple, he's a 100 target receiver last year. And based on his alpha performance last year and now being the true number 1 in this offense, and the fact that I personally believe that the running game will regress more than the passing game, meaning that they're going to pass more this year, worse game scripts for them, just having to pass, not playing with the lead. I think the defense naturally gets worse, as most defenses usually do, after they kind of outperform themselves the year before. With that said, I think that A.J. Brown's in line for like 115, 120 target potential season. And if you're going to tell me that this guy sees 40 more targets, yeah, there's no reason he can't score 9 more touchdowns. But what will happen is that he's pushing 70 receptions. He's pushing 1,250, 1,300 yards. And that's the guy who's going to start to win you leagues. And the reason I think he's a league winner this year is because a lot of people still view this Tennessee Titans offense as a run-first offense that's not going to throw the ball. And I think that's what Tennessee wants to do. But everything went perfect for them last year. Defense outperformed itself. Ryan Tannehill was the most efficient quarterback right there with Lamar Jackson in the entire league last season. Derrick Henry stayed healthy and was a beast for 1,500 yards on the ground. Having all of those things click, like literally everything was perfect. Having all those things click again is not going to be as likely. So A.J. Brown right now, like, yeah, maybe he's getting drafted in a lot of your drafts as like wide receiver 18 or 19, but on average, he's going like outside the top 20 wide receivers. And I think he has a realistic shot to finish as a top 10, top 5 wide receiver if everything clicks in the opposite direction this year. The defense gets worse. They're playing from behind more. Ryan Tannehill has to actually throw it more than 25 times per game. He threw 23.8 attempts per game last year. If Tannehill starts to throw it 32, 33 times per game, like around the average or a little bit above that, you're going to see A.J. Brown starting to see like 2 or 3 more targets a game. And if that's the case, that's when he starts to see that 120 target season. He was number 6 in yards after the catch last year, number 3 in yards per reception at 20.2, and everything was just efficient. Number 2 in yards per target, number 2 in fantasy points per route run and fantasy points per target. He was just a beast last year on all of his opportunities. So if you're going to give this beast more opportunities, he's going to absolutely feast. The beast will feast. Let's put that on the Big Sally V album. If you're a producer out there, let me know. I got some bars I just can't produce. But Ryan Tannehill, 11 games, 23.8 attempts per game last year. A little bit skewed because he came into a game early, so let's just call it like 26 attempts per game. 22 touchdowns on a 7.7% rate, 228.5 yards per game. So he was efficient, hence the 7.7% touchdown rate. Outside of like Lamar Jackson, if you usually see that number, you're saying, okay, that's going to naturally regress, and it will. But he was number 1 in play action passing, number 1 in adjusted yards per attempt, number 1 in true pass rating. This was the most efficient passing quarterback last year, right up there with Lamar Jackson, and he was even more efficient than Lamar Jackson. Lamar just had a higher touchdown percentage. He was number 2 in fantasy points per dropback. This team was just, in general, wildly efficient, whether it was Derrick Henry on the ground, whether it was the tight end Jonnu Smith, the guy who got to break out a little bit since Delaney Walker wasn't there, but I think another breakout's coming this season, whether it was A.J. Brown, Tannehill himself, everybody was just wildly efficient. So I'm looking at A.J. Brown outside the top 20, and I'm saying, this is a guy who people are viewing outside the top 20 or right around wide receiver 20 that really has the profile of being a top 12 wide receiver. I don't have him ranked there right now, but I think that upside is easily attainable right there if just everything doesn't go right for the running game. And the thing that's really nice is they didn't really bring in anything in the offseason. They don't draft a wide receiver in the draft. They don't draft a tight end in the draft. So that's a check for A.J. Brown. No more competition for him. What do they lose in free agency? Delaney Walker, he's gone, right? They're going to put Jonnu Smith in his place, and they lose Tajay Sharp, who ends up going to the Vikings. So that's another receiver in Tajay Sharp, who I actually thought was a decent receiver. What do they add in free agency? Nothing on offense. A blocking tight end, a depth running back, and then an offensive tackle. So no wide receivers are coming into this offense this year. What's going to come in is Jonnu Smith after playing 12 games as a starter last year or so. Now he's going to be the primary guy. Jonnu Smith last year, number 8 in yards after the catch for tight ends, number 3 in fantasy points per target among tight ends, number 2 in yards per target. He ended up catching 35 balls, 439 yards, and 3 touchdowns. If you watch my content, you know I like Jonnu Smith. He was a number 12 tight end for the final 12 weeks of the season last year. I think he has a lot of upside, but that's the biggest threat to competition for A.J. Brown. And that's going to come in the middle to intermediate part of the field, if anything. Corey Davis is not scaring me. 80% of the snaps last year. He finished 68th in fantasy points per route run, not good. He finished 33rd in yards per reception as a sort of deep threat at 14 yards per reception. Only saw 16% of the target share, brought in 43 receptions on 69 targets for 601 yards and 2 scores. Not scared of that. And then Adam Humphries is just a slot receiver out there, going to get some due in the middle of the field. Probably plays somewhere around 55% of the snaps or so. He saw 47 targets in 12 games last year, ended up catching 37 balls for 374 yards and 2 touchdowns. So at the end of the day, I love me some A.J. AJ Brown. You might not think that he's labeled as a league winner because he should already be an elite type of a player, like he should be a must-draft receiver, and he's very close for that. I think the floor is a little bit shaky only because if he's the one to regress and Derrick Henry continues to perform well and they continue to run the ball on the ground and their defense stays good, well then yeah, he's going to finish around like a top 20, outside the top 20 wide receivers. But I'm putting my chips on the side that Derrick Henry is ready to regress. Ryan Tannehill's going to have to throw more because the defense gets naturally worse, and AJ Brown is out there beasting. Mini Julio is just out there murking people. Go watch AJ Brown's tape. After the catch, this guy was a monster. Again, 6th in yards after the catch. Nobody can catch him. He was a gazelle, a monster gazelle, a huge man just running amongst little children out there. So AJ Brown for me, a league winner. Numero dos is another second-year wide receiver in Hollywood Brown, the Baltimore Ravens first-round pick from last year, the 25th pick in the first round. Hollywood Marquise Brown, and I like Marquise Brown a lot. And if you don't know much about Marquise Brown, well, you just know that he's a flashy receiver player out of Oklahoma. His final year at Oklahoma, he really broke out, right? 75 receptions, and he's a young player. He's going to be 23 and a half years old by the time the season starts. So he broke out at around 21 years old at Oklahoma. That's fine. He ended up catching 75 balls in 2018 there for over 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns, a 75% catch rate, 25.5% target share, and a nice 17.6 yards per reception. He was just an absolute beast. And what does he do right away in the NFL? He just absolutely erupts in a wild fashion. We'll talk about the stat line in his week 1 performance against Miami and Eric Rowe in one of the worst secondaries last year, but what he did was just unreal on the opportunities that he had. But he was dealing with a bum ankle the entire season. In that specific game, he was dealing with a bum ankle. Every single game he dealt with it. He had an injury in the preseason and it impacted him all season long. But he was still able to produce even with that injury. Now, week 1 last year, he played on 15% of the snaps. He ran 6 routes. 6 routes. Now, on average, players will probably run somewhere in like the upper 20s to like low 30s in routes run in a game, as long as their quarterback is throwing the ball like 30 to 35 times a game, right? Especially if you're the wide receiver one on your team. 6 routes last year. He caught 4 balls on 5 targets. So he ran 6 routes and was targeted 5 times on those 6 routes. Absolutely nuts. He catches 4 balls for 147 yards and 2 touchdowns. He finishes as the wide receiver 5. I'm shocked he didn't finish higher that week. Finishes as the wide receiver 5 that week with 30.7 fantasy points. That's how he kicks off his NFL career. Literally running 6 times. You play in the backyard with your friends, you're running routes, you're running more than that in about 10 minutes, and this guy ran in the entire game because of that bum ankle. And he ends up erupting, again, the number 5 wide receiver on that week. Now, in the entire season, yeah, it started to be very hit or miss. He missed 2 games with the ankle injury. It started to become an issue. Now, in week 2, he was still fine, finished as a top 25 wide receiver, scored 16.5 fantasy points, but after that, it was kind of all downhill until midway points. He would pop off here and there, have a 2 or 3 touchdown game on a prime time game, and finish as like a top 10 wide receiver like in week 12 versus the Rams. His overall stat line was 46 receptions, 584 yards, as you can see right here, on 71 targets. It was around a 19% target share. Look, it was pretty good. He saw a nice red zone target share, 20.6%, kind of skewed because he didn't have a ton of overall red zone targets, and he had like 3 or 4 red zone touchdowns alone. He saw 1.2 deep targets per game, and he just played in an offense that really didn't help the wide receivers. You can see right here Lamar Jackson's stats. Obviously, Lamar Jackson wasn't helping receivers in a major way when you rush for 175 attempts for over 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground, only throwing for 208 yards per game, but he did lead the league in touchdowns with 36 touchdowns, which is probably one of the wildest stats of last year, a 9% touchdown rate. And look at the stat at the bottom. Baltimore was dead last in pass plays per game, 29.3. So the fact that the quarterback on a team that was dead last in the league in passing plays per game could lead the league in touchdowns on that wild 9% rate. Obviously, he's the MVP. Obviously, we know what Lamar did on the ground, but it's just wild to me that you could be dead last in pass attempts per game and lead the league in NFL touchdown passes when a team like the Atlanta Falcons are out there and Tampa Bay is out there throwing wild amount of times per game, 42 times a game or so, and that's like 13 more than you're throwing per game, and you're still ending up above them in touchdown passes. Crazy stuff from Lamar and Baltimore last year. Unlike what I talked about in Tennessee, I don't know if Baltimore is going to regress. Their defense looks even better based on their draft and what they did there, drafting a pretty high-end linebacker in the first round. Everything looked really good for Baltimore. Their offense probably got better, if anything, just by Hollywood Brown getting healthier. Mark Andrews should take on more snaps with Hayden Hurst not there. They draft J.K. Dobbins in the draft that you can see right here. They draft Devon Duvernay, a wide receiver who can play the slot as sort of a plus slot receiver and take over in the slot for probably a Willie Snead. You're probably going to look at some point in the season and see Marquise Brown, Miles Boykin on the outside, 2 second-year receivers, and a rookie in Devon Duvernay in the slot. Mark Andrews only been in the league a couple of years, so a very young team. Obviously, Lamar Jackson has not been in the league all that long either. The biggest loss for them was Marshall Yanda in the offensive line decided to retire, so they tried to replace him in the draft with Tyree Phillips and Ben Bredesen, some offensive line pieces at the guard position. In free agency, that's all they really did there. But this team, I think it's going to run again, so that's the one downside for Hollywood Brown. If they're going to be like only throwing the ball 30 times per game instead of like the league average around like 35, 36, it's really hard for Hollywood Brown to break out. Well, when you look at his stats last year and you see that on a bum ankle the entire season, he was able to put up the production that he did. What happens if he's healthy? What happens if his 71 targets now that he's healthy, and maybe there's a little bit regression towards more passing for Lamar, now goes to maybe 95, 100 targets, and he's producing in a similar way, maybe not as efficient, but the more volume allows him to continue to produce, and he's now a top 20, top 15 wide receiver potentially. If this Baltimore offense goes from just dead last in pass attempts per game to, let's just say, 19th, 20th, right? They're not even in the top half of the league, but they regress that much. It's going to help Marquise Brown, Mark Andrews in a major way. Mark Andrews will probably cement himself as a top 3 tight end. And Hollywood Brown right now being drafted around the wide receiver 30 to 35 range, I think would cement himself as a top 25 and a wide receiver 2, a top 24 wide receiver. The target competition for him is going to be Mark Andrews. You can see right here, Miles Boykin, second year receiver. Willie Snead, a former Saint, a veteran. It seems like he's been in the league for so long at this point, has dealt with some major injuries, but not really going to be much of a threat. Devon Duvernay, the rookie, I think will be a threat to Willie Snead. And then Nick Boyle, the backup tight end, who should see more work now that Hayden Hurst is no longer there. Just quick profiles on these guys. We know who Mark Andrews is. He was a monster last year, 5th in tight end targets and fantasy points per game, number 1 in tight end deep targets per game with 20, number 1 in fantasy points per route run for tight ends. He only played on 43% of the snaps. That's kind of what he's done in back-to-back seasons now. Just doesn't play a lot of snaps, but does run a lot of routes out there. He ended up catching 64 balls for over 850 yards and 10 touchdowns. 10 touchdowns led the league. He was on a 24% target share. 15.6 touchdown percentage is likely to come down, but if his targets go from 98 to maybe like 110 this year because Hayden Hurst isn't there, that might be able to make up for it. Now the touchdowns might drop from like 10 to 8, but the overall receptions maybe go to like 75 instead of 64. The yardage goes from 850 to maybe pushes a 1,000-yard season, and he makes up for it. I have him right now as the wide receiver or the tight end 3 this year. Miles Boykin, a second-year player who never really got to play much. He dealt with a little bit of injuries. He was kind of overshadowed by Marquise Brown and some other veterans on this team. They didn't pass it a lot, so it wasn't like weapons got to come in and really show their stuff, because if they weren't passing a lot already and you now get an opportunity on this team to show what you can do, but you're only getting 1 to 2 targets a game, that's not great. But he did play decent when he did get to play. He played in 12 games. He had 13 receptions, 198 yards, and 3 touchdowns on 22 total targets last year, and he did see 15.2 yards per reception. So he was sort of efficient when he actually had opportunities. Willie Snead, the opposite was true. 1.41 yards per route run, was 86th in the league, very inefficient. Only saw a 10% target share, did see 5 touchdowns, but just 31 receptions, 339 yards. And then lastly, Devon Duvernay, a rookie out there, is going to be somebody who's coming out of the slot. I think he's going to have a lot of upside as well. We can look at Devon Duvernay's profile overall on my website in the Supreme Draft Guide. Go get it, banner on the screen, link down below, just $10 right now. You can see the 3rd round pick right here, Devon Duvernay, 2019 stats in college, ran over 1,300 yards, almost 1,400, played a ton out of the slot as well, 97.4% of his snaps out of the slot, and I think that's where he can be an advantage for the Baltimore Ravens. They play a lot of 2 tight end sets, but if they are going to pass, he'll probably move into the slot. So these are what the profiles look like. They're going to be enhanced. They're going to be added a little bit more and dressed up, but these are what the profiles look like if you want to check them out over on the Supreme Draft Guide. So that will be the wide receiver 2 in terms of the second one we talk about in this video. First, AJ Brown, then Hollywood Brown, both the Brown brothers. I didn't even notice that in terms of league-winning wide receivers. Let's get to our final guy, and really an honorable mention right now. So the honorable mention for this is going to be Michael Pittman, and honestly, the reason he's not an actual, say, league winner right now, you can put him in that category. The reason I kind of classify him as an honorable mention is mainly because there's no rookie camp, right? There's probably going to be no preseason. As of me recording this, they've already canceled half the games and are already really strongly debating, and it seems likely that they're going to cancel the entire preseason. AJ Brown had the luxury of having 100 yards in his first game last year as a rookie. He broke out like week 1 pretty much, right? But he was kind of inconsistent in terms of the snaps that they were giving him and the routes they were letting him run. But him and DK Metcalf, those guys are kind of standouts, right? Hollywood Brown breaking out in week 1, but then really not doing much for much of like the next 6-7 games after week 2. That's what rookies are going to do. They're just not going to get a ton of consistent playing time. They're going to take a little while to break out in the league. Michael Pittman, if it would have taken him 3 or 4 weeks, then yeah, I think that that's okay to put him out here as a league winner, because like some of the other guys we talked about, down the stretch is when I want him to break out. But the fact that there's no rookie camp, no preseason, it might take like an extra 1 to 2 weeks for him to just gain snaps in this offense and really start to break out. I personally think he's going to start right away as the X receiver Philip Rivers used to deal with when he was with the Chargers. So I think Pittman should be fine, but just because of that little bit of uncertainty, not having the rookie camp, not having the preseason, all that type of stuff, I think it's going to hurt rookie wide receivers more than any other player out there. Because rookie wide receivers rely a lot on chemistry with their quarterback. Running backs rely on their own instincts and their offensive line, which at that point you don't really need too much of a chemistry with compared to a wide receiver needing to know the route progressions when the quarterback's releasing the ball and timing with the quarterback. Michael Pittman was a beast last year. Over 100 receptions, over 1,250 yards and 11 touchdowns with USC. He has over 110,000 YouTube subscribers on his YouTube channel with his girlfriend, so check that out as well. Another bonus for him coming from a creator to another creator. But he saw 133 targets, 26.5%. Came out 6'4", 223 pounds. Has the mold of this elite wide receiver 1. And again, they're already saying they want him to be the wide receiver 1 on the outside. Dwayne Bowe and Alshon Jeffrey comps coming out of college. Very good to see. Didn't play play a lot out of the slot, which I don't expect them to use him out of the slot here. Paris Campbell will probably play out of the slot for the Colts. He only played 7% of his snaps out of the slot last year, but he did play 17.1% in 2018, so he does have that experience. So Michael Pittman for me, yeah, I do think he's one of the better rookie options based on his ADP, going right around wide receiver 50. I prefer him to Jerry Jeudy this year. I prefer him to CeeDee Lamb this year. I prefer him to like guys like Jalen Reagor potentially this year, depending on what Alshon's injury looks like and Deshaun Jackson's status come week 1. So he's one of the guys that I really like drafting out of the rookies because I think he's going right into his starting role, similar to Denzel Mims, right? I think they're going right into starting roles in this offense as potential down threat options. Now, I think this is what you're going to see in the offense. Michael Pittman, T.Y. Hilton on the outside, Paris Campbell in the slot, some combination of Marlon Mack in the backfield with Jonathan Taylor, and then Philip Rivers, the obvious quarterback. If that's the case, I like Michael Pittman's chances. I think it allows T.Y. Hilton to go back to sort of this Z wide receiver on the outside that's going to run a lot of go routes. Michael Pittman, once he learns the route tree, will be able to use a lot of that and actually be a decent weapon on the outside as the X receiver. Paris Campbell comes back in the slot after playing just 7 games last year, where he only saw 24 targets on 18 receptions because he was injured. I think you're going to see him improve now that he's potentially finally healthy. Like Paris Campbell last year, look at this. He missed 2 games with an ab injury. He missed 4 games with a hand injury. He missed 3 games with a foot fracture. Everything went wrong in the rookie year for the guy, but he was still able to get tough out there and suited up for 7 games. His final year at Ohio State, Paris Campbell, 90 receptions, over 1,000 yards, and 12 touchdowns on 100 targets, 90% catch rate. So I'm excited to see what Campbell can do in the slot. Very young team out there. In terms of their backfield, with rookie Jonathan Taylor going to get a lot of work. Paris Campbell, second-year receiver in the slot, and then you're going to have Michael Pittman on the outside. T.Y. Hilton last year, he was also injured, just played 10 games. He ended up seeing 11.1 yards per reception, which was 81st in the league. We're used to his yards per reception being very high and downfield. First year with Brissett kind of capped that a little bit. They changed his role to not be as much of a deep threat last year, T.Y. Hilton, but to be really more of an intermediate route runner. And I mean, he had a 24.6% like red zone target share. So that just kind of shows you how they were using him more. They're using him as the go-to guy, whether it was on moving the change for first downs or in the red zone. Some other competition pieces in Indy will be like Zach Pascal, Jack Doyle, the tight end, but nothing major. So I think he's going to be an honorable mention only because he's a rookie, doesn't have a ton of experience, and the fact that they're taking away his camp from him is going to leave more of a lasting mark, at least maybe a 1 or 2 week further breakout period, right? If he's going to break out this year, he's going to be a league winner. It might take 1 or 2 more weeks for that, but if we're just hoping that he's there at the final 6 to 8 weeks of the season, I think he'll have more than enough time to acclimate himself in the offense and in the NFL. So thank you so much for tuning into this video, the league winning wide receivers. Please, if you enjoyed it at all, hit the like button before you go and hit that big old subscribe button. It is the best thing that you can do for free to support this channel and my work. Let me know down below, who are your league winning wide receivers that you at least think 1 or 2 guys that you can see as being league winners this year. Let's not talk about the obvious Michael Thomas's, right, and Devontae Adams. Some guys that people aren't talking as much about or you think are being a little bit underrated. This is my website. Fantasy Sports Focus is just one of the landing pages right here. You can check it out. This is where you can get the Supreme Draft Guide. You can end up getting it for only $10 thanks to Monkey Knife Fight above. All the information for that is right down below in the description. You can just tap that. Or if you just want to go to Monkey Knife Fight, use the promo code SALNFL, SALNFL, deposit $10, play in 1 game, right? You just play $1 or 2 in a game, and it triggers an email to me that says, send that fella the draft guide, let them go win their leagues. I'm telling you right now, there's a ton of information in this. There's only going to be more as the summer months go on. As we get into August, I'm going to load up even more info into this. Heading into September, it'll be just a peak of information for you to dominate your drafts in August and September. So thank you so much, or if you want to draft earlier. So thank you so much. Like and subscribe before you go. My name's Sal. Reach out to me on Twitter at SalVetri DFS with any questions or in the comment section below, and I will see you all in the next one.